Welcome back to The Real Story, everybody. I'm Matt Karen. We want to welcome in our second guest, Melinda Johnson. She is the Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy for the YWCA of Greater Hartford. We're going to have an open and honest conversation about race. And Melinda, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to talk with you.
Matt, I'm so glad to be with you. So glad to have this virtual platform to connect.
Yeah, so let's start with what I thought was very beautiful, and I was the reporter who covered it that day. It was the funeral for George Floyd that you organized. It went from Windsor to Hartford, and you know, so often as a journalist, we cover stories viscerally, but this was really something where you felt enveloped by the emotion, how powerful it was, in large part because of your words and what you had to say. So why did you feel it was so important to organize that tribute?
That tribute was really important to me because it actually came out of a moment of prayer. So I am also the leading lady of a small church on the corner of Weston and Barber Street called Urban Hope Refuge. And a lot of the work that I do, my spiritual side, really is what drives me to do the work that I do and to invest in moments that bring our community together. So the funeral actually was a moment for us to recognize that while protests were going on and solidarity actions were going on, and really there was a lot of attention being given to the fact that Black communities were angry, that anger was really a secondary emotion to the anguish that we've been feeling for a long time.
One of the things that you had said when you spoke really struck me. Everybody knows we are in the middle of a pandemic. You had said that racism is the original pandemic and that it literally is what chokes you. And then, you know, knowing what happens with COVID, where it chokes you, knowing what George Floyd's last words were, that he couldn't breathe, the irony shouldn't be lost on anybody when it comes to that. This is very important, isn't it?
It is very important because the statement that George Floyd made, his last breath, crying out for his mother and crying out saying, "I can't breathe." We heard that statement before. We heard that years ago when Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe." And it resounds and it resonates with us and reminds us that systemic racism is that plight to communities of color that really is the knee on the neck that keeps us from being able to breathe. And some of the symptoms of that are in police brutality. Some of the other symptoms of that are in the way that housing structures are set up in urban settings. Some of the other symptoms of that are the way that Black and brown bodies are responded to in medical systems. Other symptoms are in education, but in all of these areas where we see different symptoms and we see different behaviors and we see different ideologies come up, we also see that they're all rooted in racism. And before George Floyd laid on that ground and was suffocated to death, literally assassinated before our eyes, many Black and brown community members, when they saw that, felt that it was a public demonstration to what has silently been happening in our communities all along.
Melinda, you mentioned Eric Garner, but the list goes on and on. Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland. It seems like this is a movie we've seen over and over again. Why is the ending going to be different this time?
I feel like the ending is going to be different this time because the movement is changing. Advocacy, the nature of advocacy, the nature of organizing is changing, and social media has had a lot to do with that. This is the first time that the plight of Black Americans, the plight of Black and brown people in this country is causing a global uprising. And so the same way that the coronavirus was a pandemic that people faced all over the country, all over the nation, and all over the globe, is the same way that we're seeing activists and individuals begin to speak out in their countries and under their governments regarding the systems that are policing and brutalizing and suppressing and oppressing Black and brown people in their countries as well. So what's going to be different about this is not just a statewide or a national press. This is a global press for justice. We are saying as a civilization that we have to do better at this time.
Melinda, I want to ask you a question, and I understand if you don't want to answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's important. You know, we are all a product of our own life experiences. I haven't lived what you've lived. You haven't lived what I've lived. Would you feel comfortable sharing any experiences that you've had in your life as a black woman that you feel have disadvantaged you?
Yeah, I definitely can share so many and too many, right? And what's unfortunate is when you're asked that question as a black woman, when you're asked that question as a person of color, for a moment, you almost can't run into the archives and just pull up a document and say, this once upon a time happened to me. Because it's so many moments that they begin to be blurred and blended together till it's almost normative. I've had everything from individuals not accept my applications when I desire to be in media here in Connecticut because of the color of my skin, because of the texture of my hair and my hairstyle. I've had everything from having friends that spoke with me and told me about the reason why they were late to events that we had together was because they were stopped by police and harassed. I am now the mother of 2 young black boys, and educating them and raising them in this country. What resounds in me and what resonates in my mind is that there will come a day where I have to instruct them on how to conduct themselves publicly when I'm not around for the sake of their safety, and know that even if they do good, even if they are good boys and do everything that they're supposed to, that there's still a threat on their life just because they're black. And someone might approach them and choose to disrespect them and treat them in inhumane ways because of the color of their skin. That is what we can't stand for anymore. And in my church with my husband, we've moved past just having to protest and moved past just having to make noise. We're moving for policy now. We're moving for economic change. We're saying that in order for us to tip the scales of justice and make real justice happen in our communities, we have to have an agenda that includes policy and economics for our black and brown communities in order to turn things around.
And one thing, Melinda, that seems to be changing as we speak is the role of police in society. And I just wanted to get your thoughts really quickly on that. There was a very powerful moment during that George Floyd funeral on the Capitol steps where the police officers, they took a knee in solidarity. What do you believe the role of the police should be in society?
The role of the police is rooted in its history. And we have to ask ourselves, with the current system that we have, where did policing come from in this country? And we know that after Jim Crow and well before Jim Crow, when slavery was abolished, that between that time period when communities had to consider how to keep safety as a priority, that's where the police department came up. But the police department arose as an institution that was there to protect some and discipline others. Protect some and discipline others. And black and brown people have always found themselves on the other side of that scale where we're being disciplined and not protected. And so what needs to take place is we're not just talking about cultural change and ideology change. We're talking about real transformative structural change. We're talking about everything from how someone is able to elevate themselves and go from rank to rank within the office, to how officers view the community and their role in the community. So it's going to take much more than just policy change. It's going to take much more than cultural change. It's going to take a coupling of a few things, because this is not something that developed yesterday. Racism and systemic racism in our country is older than you and I, and it will take a few generations and a few generational-minded people to make the recommendations and the changes necessary for police to be able to be embraced in the community the way that we want to see them, in a way that is supportive for the safety of all people.
Melinda, I think we have just about a minute left, and I want to end it on this. I think it's very important. You know, people can sometimes be uncomfortable talking about race. For those who don't look like each other, you know, we all have a role to play, right? So how can we help? You know, people may say, I haven't had your life experiences, so I don't know what it feels like. Therefore, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. So how can we help? How can we each, no matter what the color of our skin is, how can we each play a role?
Yes, I think at the tables that we sit at and in the communities that we belong to, making the statement that you just made, Matt, and saying, this is uncomfortable and I don't know what to say or what to do, that is the beginning of a transparent conversation. Complicity has been coupled with comfort for too long in our country. And there are so many topics, not just racism, there are so many topics that we don't even tinker on publicly because of feeling afraid that we'll be uncomfortable and that in our uncomfort we won't have the right answers and we'll be wrong. But what is wrong right now is not doing anything. And what we all have to stand on is the fact that this is not okay. It's not enough at this moment just to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist.
All right, Melinda.
You have
Melinda, we got to leave it there. We are out of time, but this was a great, open, and honest conversation. Melinda Johnson of the YWCA of Greater Hartford, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you for joining us on The Real Story this Sunday. That's all we have for you. Be sure to tune in next week. You can watch all the segments of The Real Story online, fox61.com, and be sure to join us for the Fox 61 News tonight at 10.